On a foggy New York evening, the sound of the city's pulse was muffled, as though the streets themselves were holding their breath. In the heart of Fifth Avenue, behind the grand facade of an old brownstone, Edward Chandler sat alone in his study, his final moments already in motion. A wealthy financier with connections stretching into the very core of New York's power. Chandler was a man who had everything, and yet someone wanted him dead. But who? And why? As the city's lights flickered outside, so too did the shadows of secrets too dangerous to stay hidden. The quiet hum of the city was about to be shattered, but who would be the first to break the silence? The puzzle was beginning, and the clock was ticking. Want to know who killed Chandler and why? Stay tuned for every twist and turn as the mystery unfolds. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. This is just the beginning. Chapter 1. A murder most unseen. The city was a blur of shadows and fog, with a low hum of traffic carrying the weight of 1,000 secrets down Fifth Avenue. The skyline of New York loomed like a half-forgotten dream, an endless stretch of glistening glass and steel. Yet beneath it, the heart of the city pulsed with something darker, more insidious. It was a city of power and wealth, yes, but also one of hidden corners, of lives lived in the shadows, and of truths that few dared uncover. On this particular morning, as the fog clung to the streets like a veil, the call came in. "Mr. Wolfe, we have a murder." Inspector Kramer's voice crackled over the phone, unceremonious and blunt. "Edward Chandler, dead in his study. We need your help." The words were hardly a surprise. Wolfe was used to such calls, but this one carried an air of finality, a sense of urgency. There was something about it that did not sit right. Chandler was no ordinary man. Wealthy, influential, and well-regarded, he was a fixture of New York society, an icon of success. He was also a philanthropist, a man who had built his fortune and reputation on charity and good deeds. For a man like that to end up dead in his own home, in the dead of night, spoke of something far darker. Wolfe, however, was not a man who rushed. He was deliberate, slow, and methodical, traits that had earned him a reputation as one of the finest detectives in the city, if not the world. His thoughts moved like a glacier, taking their time, but always getting to the heart of the matter in the end. As always, he was in no hurry to leave his sanctuary. As he sat at his desk, the faint smell of orchids mingling with the cigar smoke, Archie Goodwin, his assistant, stepped into the room. A man of quick reflexes and faster wit, Archie was a complete opposite of Wolfe in temperament. He was never still, always moving, always speaking. Yet today, even Archie seemed to sense that this was no ordinary case. "Wolfe," Archie said, his voice low, his usual bravado replaced by something else. "This one's different." "Different, Archie?" Wolfe replied, without looking up from the book he was reading. "How so?" "I don't know, Wolfe. There's something about Chandler. His reputation. His influence. People don't just die like this." Wolfe set his book aside and turned to look at Archie, his piercing eyes narrowing. "Everyone dies, Archie. But not everyone dies meaningfully. We'll see what this one means soon enough." Wolfe stood, adjusting his bow tie as if the very act of doing so were a final confirmation that he was ready for whatever came next. He turned and began to move towards the door, his thoughts already shifting, processing the details. The drive to brownstone on Fifth Avenue was quiet, the streets wet from the morning's rain, the city wrapped in an almost unnatural silence. As they approached the building, Wolfe could feel it, the weight of the place. There was something about this house, something that seemed to emanate from its very structure. It was grand, yes, with its stone facade and ivy creeping up its walls, but there was something else, a sense of foreboding, as though the house itself knew the terrible secret it was about to reveal. The door was opened by a uniformed officer, who ushered them inside, without ceremony. The air was thick with the smell of polished wood, expensive furniture, and beneath it all, something far more sinister, the unmistakable scent of death. They were led to the study, the scene of the crime. It was an immaculate room, designed for power, with its dark wood high-backed leather chairs and shelves lined with books that whispered of wealth and influence. The windows were open slightly, letting the faintest breeze, as though nature itself was trying to breathe life into the stillness of the room. At the center of it all, Edward Chandler sat in a chair, his body frozen in time. The light from the overhead chandelier caught the sharp angles of his face, giving him an almost ethereal quality. Still perfect, as though he were simply resting. But it was the blood, dark and dried around the wound at his temple, that told the true story. The man was dead. Wolfe stepped closer, his eyes scanning every detail of the room with the precision of a surgeon. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken glass, no overturned furniture. Chandler had not fought for his life. He had been taken swiftly, quietly, perhaps even without a chance to understand what was happening. Wolfe's eyes flickered to the desk. It was neat, too neat. Papers were stacked in perfect order. A fountain pen lying across an unfinished letter. A glass of brandy sat untouched, its contents still as clear as when it had been poured. Chandler's hand was resting on the arm of the chair, his fingers slightly curled, as though he had been in the middle of thought when death interrupted him. "Do you see, Archie?" Wolfe's voice broke the silence, rich and calm. "A man of Chandler's stature does not die like this, not without a reason. There is no chaos in this room, no struggle. His death was orchestrated with precision." Archie nodded, his eyes scanning the room, trying to make sense of it all. No sign of a fight, no robbery, no obvious motive. Wolfe's eyes narrowed as he moved to the desk, his fingers brushing over the surface, taking in every detail. Then, with an almost imperceptible movement, he turned to a small, hidden drawer in the corner of the desk. Wolfe's gloved hands gently slid it open. Inside, there was only a single envelope. No markings, no return address. He picked it up slowly, almost reverently, his mind already spinning with the possibilities. "Nothing is ever as it seems, Archie," Wolfe said, his voice soft but sharp. "This murder is but the first note in a symphony of shadows." The envelope was empty. Archie felt a chill run down his spine, though he couldn't explain why. It was just an empty envelope. Yet it felt like the key to something far darker, something that had been hidden beneath the polished veneer of Chandler's life. Wolfe's eyes, however, had already moved beyond the envelope, beyond the immediate evidence. He was already thinking 3 steps ahead. "Let's go, Archie," Wolfe said, his voice low and steady. "We've only just begun to see the truth." As they left the room, Archie couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking deeper into a trap that had been set long before Chandler's death, and one that would not easily be escaped. The city outside, with its fog and shadows, seemed to whisper its secrets, and Wolfe, with his mind as sharp as a blade, was the only one who could uncover them. But even he couldn't know how deep the shadows went. Not yet. Chapter 2, Beneath the Ivy's Veil. The evening had come with the same quiet grace that often preceded the storm, and yet there was no storm to speak of. Only a subtle, lingering unease that seemed to settle over the city. Wolfe and Archie had returned to Brownstone, and the air inside was heavy with the weight of unanswered questions. The rain, which had begun to fall in a soft, steady rhythm earlier in the day, had turned the streets slick, making the city appear even more elusive, as though it were hiding something beneath its polished surface. As they entered the study for the second time, the stillness of the room was palpable. The body of Edward Chandler had been removed, but the atmosphere of death still lingered in the corners of the room, clinging to the velvet upholstery of the armchairs, to the carefully arranged stacks of books. Even the faint scent of the brandy, now dissipated, seemed to hover in the air like a ghost of its former presence. Wolfe moved through the room with deliberate slowness, his eyes taking in every detail, each object an enigma to be solved, each subtle change in the room's layout a clue to be unraveled. His fingers brushed lightly over the edge of Chandler's desk, where the thin layer of dust had not been disturbed, but his gaze was drawn to a painting that hung above the mantelpiece. The painting was of a landscape, an old-world depiction of a river, winding its way through a forest, the sort of scene that one might expect in a home of someone who valued heritage and tradition. And yet, there was something about it, a slight imbalance in the brushstrokes, a shadow where there should have been light. That bothered Wolfe. "Archie," Wolfe said, his voice a low murmur, "do you see it?" Archie, who had been pacing by the window, turned and followed Wolfe's gaze to the painting. His eyes scanned the canvas, but all he saw was a tranquil scene, peaceful and untouched by the violence that occurred here. "I don't see anything unusual, Wolfe." Archie replied, his voice carrying a hint of impatience. He was eager for answers, for something solid to grasp, but Wolfe was always drawn to the smallest details. Wolfe moved closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the painting more intently. With a swift motion, he reached up and gently pulled the painting from its hook on the wall, revealing the bare surface beneath. It was here on the wall itself that the first piece of the puzzle was revealed, a faint, almost imperceptible outline of a hidden compartment. The wall had been altered, and there, behind the canvas, was a secret space. Wolfe smiled faintly, a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. You see, Archie, nothing is ever as it seems. Not here, not in this house. With a careful, practiced motion, Wolfe reached into the compartment and pulled out a small, leather-bound journal. The cover was worn, the edges frayed, as though it had been handled many times before, its pages full of secrets carefully guarded. Wolfe ran his fingers over the journal's surface, considering the weight of what it might contain. Archie stepped forward, his curiosity piqued. What is it? A diary? Wolfe did not answer immediately. Instead, he flipped open the cover with the reverence of someone who understood the significance of what he was holding. The first few pages were filled with cryptic notes, each one more perplexing than the last. Names, places, dates. The journal appeared to chronicle the movements of various individuals, many of them wealthy or well-known, their actions recorded in a cold, methodical hand. As Wolfe continued to read, a pattern began to emerge, a pattern that tied Chandler to a secretive group of men and women, people who had long ago slipped into the shadows of society, leaving only whispers behind them. The more Wolfe read, the more the mystery deepened. These were not ordinary individuals. They were powerful figures, movers and shakers of the financial and political world, who had, it seemed, orchestrated their lives and fortunes in the shadows, behind closed doors, hidden away from the public eye. This, Archie, Wolfe said quietly, closing the journal, is the key. This is what Chandler knew. This is what cost him his life. Archie, his brow furrowed, leaned in closer. But why? What was Chandler involved in? What does all of this mean? Wolfe's eyes met Archie's, and for the first time, the detective allowed a shadow of doubt to pass through his expression. Chandler was not just a financier, Archie. He was a part of something far darker than any of us could have imagined. A secret society, operating under the radar, manipulating the city's very foundation for their own gain. Archie's eyes widened, the weight of Wolfe's words sinking in. A secret society? You mean like one of those conspiracies we've heard about? A group of elites pulling the strings. Precisely, Wolfe said, nodding. And Chandler had been trying to leave it all behind. He wanted out, but the shadows did not let go so easily. Once you are a part of their world, there is no escape. The realization hung in the air, thick and heavy. The elegant world of high society, the glittering veneer of wealth and power, was nothing more than a stage for something far more dangerous. A web of influence spun by men and women who hid their true faces behind masks of charity and social good. And Chandler, in his quest for redemption, had become a target. Wolfe turned the journal over in his hands, his fingers tracing the worn edges, as if he could feel the weight of the lives held within its pages. Someone wanted Chandler dead, Archie. Someone wanted him silenced, to prevent him from exposing the truth. And that someone is still out there. The room seemed to grow colder as the shadows deepened, and Archie couldn't help but feel the pull of something vast, something unseen, moving just beyond his reach. The murder of Edward Chandler was no isolated incident. It was a piece of a much larger puzzle, and Wolfe, as always, was the only one who could see the connections that others missed. The house around them seemed to breathe, the silence punctuated only by the distant rumble of thunder. Wolfe's gaze remained fixed on the journal, his mind already turning over the next steps in the investigation, already anticipating the twists and turns that lay ahead. But as the storm outside began to gather strength, Archie could not shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of something far darker, far more complex than they had yet begun to understand. The shadows that had once merely lurked in the corners of Chandler's life were now closing around them, and soon they would all be forced to face what had been hidden beneath the ivy-covered veil of Fifth Avenue. And for the first time, Archie felt the weight of that truth pressed down on him. There was no turning back now. Chapter 3. the key to the past. The night had settled over New York like a blanket of secrets, the kind that suffocated the city's restless pulse, trapping the hidden truths beneath layers of concrete and steel. The rain had stopped, but the sky remained thick with clouds, casting an eerie pall over Fifth Avenue. Wolfe and Archie sat in the quiet of their office, the dim light of the chandelier flickering, as if in tune with the tension in the air. The journal Wolfe had uncovered earlier lay open on his desk, its pages filled with cryptic notes that seemed to lead nowhere, yet Wolfe's mind was already several steps ahead, decoding its mysteries with a calm, methodical precision. Archie, on the other hand, had been pacing the room for hours. His impatience, though tempered by Wolfe's calm, was growing. He could feel the weight of the case pressing down on him. Edward Chandler's murder had opened doors to a world of power and conspiracy, a world where the truth felt as intangible as the shadows that stretched across the city skyline. And though Wolfe had not said as much, Archie knew the detective was deep into a thought process, weaving together connections that would soon reveal the heart of the puzzle. But how far would Wolfe go to uncover it? "You're quiet, Archie," Wolfe remarked without looking up from the journal. His voice was calm, as always, but there was an undercurrent to it, a note of finality. "You're thinking about Chandler's death, aren't you?" "Thinking? I'm trying to piece this whole thing together, Wolfe," Archie replied, his voice sharp with frustration. He stopped pacing and turned to face his boss. "I just don't get it. A man like Chandler, killed in cold blood, and for what? A secret society hidden for years, and now you've got this journal with more cryptic notes than answers. How do we even begin to make sense of it all?" Wolfe closed the journal with a soft, deliberate movement, his eyes finally meeting Archie's. "You don't start with the end, Archie. You start with the beginning. And Chandler's beginning was buried long ago, beneath layers of wealth, power, and hidden intentions." Archie raised an eyebrow. "You're not making sense, Wolfe." Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled before him, his face illuminated in the soft light of the desk lamp. His expression was one of rare concentration, his mind working through the tangled web of lies and truths that had surrounded Chandler's life. "Do you remember, Archie, what Chandler's background was before he became a philanthropist?" Wolfe asked quietly, his voice filled with an almost unnoticeable edge of anticipation. "Before the public knew him as the man of wealth and good works." Archie hesitated. "He was a financier, right? Started with nothing, worked his way up in the stock market." "But that's just it, Wolfe. That's all anyone knows." "Exactly," Wolfe replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "What no one knows, Archie, is that Chandler's rise to power was not as self-made as the world believes. He was born into a family with deep ties to some very powerful people. A family with a history that stretches back far before the city was ever built up into the skyscraper-clad giant it is today." Archie's interest was piqued, but he still couldn't see how this was relevant to the murder. "So, Chandler had family connections. Big deal." Wolfe's eyes flashed with a quiet intensity. "It is a big deal, Archie. A very big deal. Chandler's family was involved in a secret society, one that wielded influence over much of New York's political and financial landscape, an organization that operated in the shadows, pulling strings from behind closed doors. The people in that society are the ones who built this city, and they didn't do it by playing fair. Chandler himself had distanced himself from it, but the society never let go. They never forget their own." Archie's mind raced. "So, you think Chandler's murder has something to do with his past? He was killed because he tried to leave these people behind." Wolfe's voice was steady, almost soothing, as he continued. "Yes, but there's more. Chandler was not merely a participant. He was a key player. He knew too much, Archie, and there were others who knew that, too. Those who still hold the reins in the city's shadows." Archie stood still, his thoughts finally catching up with Wolfe's. "And you think those people are still out there, pulling the strings even now?" "Precisely," Wolfe replied, his gaze drifting to a window, where the distant lights of the city flickered in the darkness. "But there's something else you must understand. Chandler's attempt to escape them, to leave their influence behind, wasn't just a personal decision. It was an act of defiance. He was trying to expose them, try to reveal their influence and their methods. And that, Archie, is why he died. The weight of Wolfe's words hung in the air, and Archie could feel the chill that had crept into the room. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the picture they formed was one that Archie wasn't sure he was ready to see. Wolfe stood, his chair creaking slightly as he pushed it back. "We must visit Chandler's former associates," he said, his tone resolute. "There are those who remain hidden, even now. They are the ones who will lead us to the truth. They have been hiding in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of New York's elite, their power unfathomable." Archie nodded slowly, his mind still churning with the revelations Wolfe had uncovered. "Who are they, Wolfe?" Wolfe paused, his eyes narrowing. "That is what we must find out. But we will need to dig deeper, much deeper than we have before. Chandler's death was not the result of some random act. It was a calculated move in a much larger game." Wolfe's next words were filled with quiet finality. "And I intend to uncover every move in that game." As Wolfe gathered his coat and hat, preparing to leave for yet another round of questioning, the air in the room grew colder. The world outside was still cloaked in fog and darkness, but inside, a fire had been lit. A fire that would not be extinguished until the truth was uncovered. Wolfe's mind was set, his path clear, but Archie could not shake the feeling that they were treading on dangerous ground. As they left the office, the streets outside seemed to beckon them forward, but it wasn't the city's lights that drew them in. It was the shadows beneath them, the ones that had been waiting for years to be revealed. Chapter 4. The mask comes off. The city, drenched in the soft glow of streetlights, felt like a stage set for a play that no one had been prepared to witness. The night air was crisp and carried with it the faint scent of rain on the pavement. It was the kind of night that made New York seem both beautiful and indifferent, a city whose glittering exterior hid a labyrinth of secrets just beneath the surface. Wolfe and Archie moved through the streets in silence, the tension between them palpable. Wolfe's mind had already begun to unravel the complexities of the case, but Archie felt as though they were merely skimming the surface of something far deeper, something far more dangerous. The murder of Edward Chandler had not been an isolated event. It was part of a much larger, more intricate puzzle that was slowly taking shape, and each new piece only added to mystery. Tonight, they were headed to meet Senator Joseph Vane, one of the most powerful men in the city, a man whose name had come up repeatedly in their investigation. Vane was known for his polished public persona, for his clean image and tireless work on behalf of the city's most vulnerable. But beneath the facade, Wolfe suspected there was more to the senator than met the eye. Something dark, something that tied him to Chandler's death. As they entered the lobby of Vane's office building, the polished marble floors and grandiose chandeliers seemed to mock the seriousness of their purpose. The world of politics, with its glitz and its power, was a world that Wolfe knew all too well. A world where masks were worn so often that even the wearers forgot who they truly were. It was a world in which the truth was a currency, traded behind closed doors, far away from the eyes of the public. A receptionist led them to a private elevator, and as they ascended, Archie could feel the weight of anticipation pressing on him. He had never been comfortable in these lofty circles, and tonight was no exception. The senator, as Wolfe had suggested, was a man who knew how to play the game, and Archie couldn't shake the feeling that this meeting would reveal a side of him that no one had ever seen. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and they were escorted down a long, carpeted corridor that led to the senator's private office. The space was elegant, yet cold, an office filled with expensive furniture, rich dark woods, and large windows that offered a sweeping view of the city below. But despite the wealth and power the room exuded, it lacked warmth. It was a place of business, not of life. Senator Vane stood when they entered, a tall, imposing figure in his mid-50s, dressed impeccably in a suit that spoke of wealth and influence. His handshake was firm, his smile practiced, and his eyes, dark and calculating, betrayed nothing of what lay beneath the surface. "Mr. Wolfe, Mr. Goodwin." Vane greeted them smoothly, his voice deep and rich. "I understand you have some questions about my association with Edward Chandler. Please have a seat." Wolfe nodded and lowered himself into one of the leather chairs in front of the senator's desk. Archie, following suit, took the chair beside him. The air between them was thick with the unspoken tension of two men who both understood that every word spoken here was a move in a larger game. Vane sat behind his desk, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood, his eyes fixed on Wolfe. I assume you've come to discuss Chandler's unfortunate death. It's a tragedy, truly. He was a friend, and his work for the city cannot be overstated. Wolfe studied Vane intently, his fingers steepled in front of his face. Yes, Chandler was a friend. At least, that's what the public would have believed. But tell me, Senator, how well did you really know him? Vane's eyes flickered for a moment, but his expression remained unchanged. I knew Chandler well enough. He was an important figure in this city. He and I worked together on various initiatives over the years. But his murder, it's a shame. A great loss. A great loss indeed, Wolfe murmured, leaning back slightly in his chair. But not a loss without purpose, I suspect. Chandler was involved in something far more significant than anyone knew. Senator, something that you, I'm sure, were deeply involved in. Vane's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but his smile did not falter. I'm afraid I don't know what you mean, Mr. Wolfe. I've never been involved in anything untoward. Wolfe's gaze was unyielding, his tone calm, almost soothing. Oh, I believe you have, Senator. You see, Chandler was more than just a philanthropist. He was once part of a very exclusive circle, an organization that controlled much of the city's wealth and influence, moving behind the scenes like a shadow. And you, Senator Vane, were very much a part of that shadow. Vane's eyes narrowed, and for the first time, the mask slipped just slightly. Wolfe could see the flicker of recognition in the senator's gaze, the moment when the truth began to seep in. You're implying that I was somehow involved in this conspiracy? Vane's voice had lost some of its smoothness, but he quickly regained his composure. That's absurd, Mr. Wolfe. I've spent my career working for the betterment of the city. Wolfe's lips curled into a thin smile. Of course, Senator. You worked tirelessly for the city. But your actions behind the scenes, your involvement in Chandler's past, tell a different story. Chandler wanted out, didn't he? He wanted to break free from your influence, from the very society that has been manipulating this city for years. And that, Senator, is what cost him his life. Vane's hand clenched on the edge of his desk, but he didn't speak. Wolfe, sensing the senator's unease, continued. Chandler knew too much, didn't he? He had the evidence, the connections. He was poised to expose everything. But you couldn't allow that, could you? Not when so much was at stake. So you had him silenced. For a long moment, there was silence in the room, broken only by the soft hum of the air conditioning. The weight of Wolfe's words hung in the air like a thick fog. Vane's face had gone pale, the practice veneer slipping away, revealing the man beneath. I don't know what you're talking about, Vane finally said, his voice strained. I had nothing to do with Chandler's death. Wolfe studied him for a long moment before speaking again, his voice low, almost soothing. Of course you didn't, Senator. But I think we both know that there are those who have far more to lose than you do. People who wanted Chandler's death, and who knew exactly how to make it look like an accident. Vane shifted in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Who are you implying? His voice barely above a whisper now. Wolfe leaned in, his eyes sharp and knowing. I'm implying that Chandler was not your first target, Senator, and he will not be the last. The senator's face froze. The room, once filled with a hum of power and influence, now seemed suffocating, like a trap closing on all sides. And just like that, the mask had come off. Wolfe had exposed a crack in the carefully constructed world of Senator Joseph Vane. But the truth was still elusive, hidden beneath layers of deceit and manipulation. And Wolfe knew that this was just the beginning. As they left the senator's office, Archie couldn't shake the feeling that they were inching closer to something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Wolfe, however, seemed undeterred, his mind already moving forward, plotting the next steps in their investigation. The shadows of the city had begun to shift, and Wolfe was prepared to chase them wherever they led. Chapter 5, A Twist in the Web. The final chapter of their journey had arrived, though neither Wolfe nor Archie could quite feel the weight of it. It was as though the city itself, with its towering buildings and endless streets, had swallowed them whole. Everything felt suspended in time, like a final note lingering in the air, waiting to be resolved. The night was colder now, as if the city had finally exhaled all the warmth that it concealed beneath its glittering surface. Wolfe and Archie sat in their office, the quiet hum of the city's life outside seeming a world away. There were no more calls to be made, no more doors to be knocked upon. Everything they needed to know was now before them, laid out like a tapestry of lies and truth, its threads tangled and knotted, waiting for the right hands to untangle it. Wolfe sat in his chair, his gaze fixed on the orchids in the corner of the room, lost in thought. The puzzle was complete, and yet the answers were not as satisfying as Archie had expected. The twists and turns had revealed much, but the final revelation, the true mastermind behind Chandler's murder, remained elusive, hanging like a shadow just out of reach. Wolfe, however, had a way of seeing beyond the obvious. He could sense things that others could not, a skill honed by years of silent observation. Archie, for his part, had been restless. He had spent the better part of the last few days following the threads of the investigation, questioning suspects, gathering evidence, but nothing had seemed to click. It was as though they had only been seeing the surface of the story, never the whole picture. But Wolfe was never one to rush to conclusions. He was methodical, patient. And when he finally spoke, it was with a calm certainty that came only after careful thought. "Archie," Wolfe said, breaking the silence, "I believe we've been looking in the wrong direction all along." Archie's brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We got Vane's confession, his connection to Chandler's past, the secret society, and everything else. We got enough to put him away for good." Wolfe's lips curved into a small, knowing smile. "Yes, we do. But we're missing something crucial. You see, the puzzle we've been solving isn't about Vane. It's about who wanted Vane to take the fall." Archie leaned forward, his interest piqued. "Who's behind Vane, then? Who stand to gain by framing him?" Wolfe's gaze was piercing, his eyes narrowing as he began to connect the dots. "The answer, Archie, has been here all along. It wasn't Vane's ambition that killed Chandler. It was someone much closer to Chandler, someone who knew exactly how to pull the strings." Archie's pulse quickened as Wolfe continued. The truth had always been hidden in plain sight, and yet it had taken Wolfe's unmatched brilliance to uncover it. "You see," Wolfe said slowly, his voice rich with quiet intensity, "Edward Chandler's death wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about his secret society ties. It was about control. There was someone else behind the scenes, someone who could manipulate the entire situation to their advantage." Wolfe paused, letting the silence hang between them like a thread waiting to snap. "And that someone is Eleanor Chandler," Wolfe finished, his voice low but firm. The room seemed to grow stiller. Archie sat frozen, his mind scrambling to process the revelation. Eleanor? Chandler's wife. He couldn't quite grasp it, but she was the victim's wife, the one who mourned him in public, attended the funerals, spoke of his charity and legacy. Wolfe nodded, his gaze unyielding. "That's the beauty of it, Archie. Eleanor was the perfect person to be underestimated. She had access to Chandler, to his wealth, to his secrets, and she knew precisely how to manipulate him. She was the one who encouraged his turnaround, his public reformation. But behind the scenes, she was the one pulling the strings." Archie's confusion deepened. But why would she kill her own husband? What could she gain? Wolfe leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of him as if savoring the moment. Eleanor Chandler was not only trying to escape the influence of the secret society. She was trying to control it. She and Vane had been in league for years. Archie. She knew about the society's power, and she saw an opportunity to take it for herself. Chandler was the last piece of the puzzle. Once he was dead, she could take over his financial empire and his place in the shadows of the city. She could be the one pulling the strings from the shadows. Archie's mind reeled. He had never suspected Eleanor. She had been the picture of grief, the widow cloaked in black, the woman who had lost everything. How could she possibly have been the orchestrator of this dark plan? "It was a well-calculated move," Wolfe continued. "She knew that Chandler's death would draw attention to the senator, so she manipulated the situation, playing the victim while secretly orchestrating the entire thing. Vane, of course, was her pawn in this game. He had the public influence, the connections, and the ability to mislead the investigation. But Eleanor had the ultimate goal in mind. Archie's thoughts spun as he pieced it all together. She staged Chandler's murder, used the society's influence to cover her tracks, and then let Vane take the fall. She had him framed, knowing that no one would look at her twice. And once Vane was arrested, she could step in unchallenged. Wolfe's eyes glinted with quiet satisfaction. Precisely, Archie. Eleanor Chandler is a master manipulator, a woman who knows how to play the game better than anyone. Her grief was an act, her mourning a performance. She controlled every move, every step of the way. The revelation hung in the air, the truth finally coming to light in a way that felt almost surreal. Wolfe had untangled the web of deception, revealing the mastermind behind the crime, the one who had remained hidden in plain sight. Eleanor Chandler, the widow, had been the true villain all along. As Wolfe stood, his hands resting on the back of his chair, he looked out the window at the city below. The lights of New York shimmered in the distance, a symbol of the world that would never know the full story. The streets, the towers, the secrets, all of it remained shrouded in darkness, even as the truth emerged. "Let's go, Archie," Wolfe said softly, his voice calm but resolute. "It's time to confront Mrs. Chandler." With that, they left the office, stepping into the night once more. But the city had changed, its shadows now a little darker, its mysteries a little more tangible. They had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, they had only revealed the smallest fraction of the story, a story that would continue to unfold in the hidden corners of the city, where power, wealth, and secrets still ruled.